The more I do this with people, the more it becomes clear to me how intertwined the uterus is with detoxification, and how if we look at our cycle every month as a way to kind of get rid of stuff and shed the
Yeah.
lining, if people are having too much blood or heavy periods, there's so many factors, but improving this drainage and detoxification in your body will help that
Yeah.
process.
Hey, ladies, welcome to the Calm Edge podcast. I'm your host, Brooke. Does it feel like your brain is on overdrive? Maybe you're struggling with spiraling thoughts and feeling like you can't relax. Well, hey, I have a solution for you. I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I help women just like you every single day reprogram their minds to master overthinking and eliminate self-doubt so you can feel calm, confident, and elevated. Let's dive in. Welcome back. You are going to love my guest today. Lauren is a doctor of physical therapy and a restorative wellness practitioner. After years of personal suffering from chronic constipation, hormone imbalances, and medications that made matters worse, and trialing Band-Aid solutions that ignored root cause exploration, Lauren embarked on a wellness journey of her own to heal her body from within. And now she works one-on-one with clients to facilitate healing from a whole body perspective, focusing on gut and hormone health, nervous system regulation, and detoxification. I worked personally with Lauren over the last year, and I had some pretty unbelievable transformational, I don't know what you would even call it, healing with Lauren. Also, not to mention that I got pregnant like super fast after, and that wasn't even the goal when I first started working with Lauren. So I wanted to bring her on and I wanted to talk about what we did. First of all, Lauren, welcome, welcome. Thank you for
Yes,
coming.
thank you. Yeah.
I'm getting carried away already
No, no,
because I'm
no,
so
go for
excited.
it.
And the thing is, I think, Lauren, that is interesting about this is when I met you, I always considered myself a really healthy person. I would do my protein smoothies and, I always worked out. I've always been an athlete. I've always been very interested in health and wellness. And then obviously through my own work in hypnotherapy, I understand the mind body connection, yada, yada. So I thought that I was pretty much on top of my health. And you're the first person that I've ever really worked with that was not the traditional route. It's like not a traditional doctor. Let me tell you guys a little bit about what I was experiencing before I started working with Lauren. Severe period pain, cramps, pelvic floor pain. When I actually started keeping count, I was taking like 17 Advil over a 3-day period during one menstrual cycle. In 3 days, I would take 17 Advil just to be able to sleep and function. That's how bad the pain was. And with those 17 Advil, still was in excruciating amount of cramps. And I had had an ovarian cyst on my ovary for kind of like 2 or 3 years. My doctor found it there a while back, my gynecologist. And, when she found it, she was like, okay, well, the only thing we can really do for you is surgery. It's not huge, so we can kind of watch it for a little while. But a year later, it was still there. And I actually really loved this gynecologist. She wasn't well versed in supplements and hormonal imbalances, but she at least had the wherewithal to be like, I know some people have tried supplements and that's helped. I don't really know what direction to point you in. So I have to say, I at least appreciate that. So that's kind of when I came to learn. I was just like, these symptoms are getting so bad, so out of control. And in 3 months with Lauren, not only did I actually shrink that cyst based on scans that I did before and after the protocol I did with Lauren, I shrunk a cyst and now it's actually completely gone a year later, which is cool after having it for 3 years. But also, I went from 17 Advil a period down to 6 Advil a period, and then I got pregnant.
Yeah.
So now I just don't deal with it at all, which is kind of nice.
9 months of just not,
Yeah,
you got
of
other things
other
going
things,
on.
but
Yeah.
that was a really
Crazy.
long explanation. But I want everyone to understand this was a massive shift. And all we changed was a few lifestyle tweaks.
Yeah. You had previously done with a different practitioner a Dutch test, which is like a dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. I did an interpretation on my own from that because and this is, I do this with all my clients because a lot of tests that we've had previously, like I don't always want to redo them. I'm like, okay, if you have something, send it over. Let me look at it through my lens and see if maybe something comes up differently that I can see that somebody else didn't see, or whatever the case is. So you did a
That's
Dutch test.
that's kind of an important point that I sort of want to stop and pause for a second, because the way you interpreted this test was different than the way someone else would interpret the test. And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is important because, say you're working with your primary care physician and you have a blood test done and they say everything's normal. Well, Lauren, you kind of explained to me that different people look at tests differently. And the way you look at a test is not looking at is something in or out of range, but you're looking at trends, like overall trends. So even though my hormones kind of showed up as, quote, normal within normal range, there was a story to be told there when
Yeah,
you
so
looked at.
there's different types of ways that we can test our hormones. A lot of times, typically, and I've had this done through my gynecologist previously when I was having hormone issues, is I had a blood test, and they usually say, come on day 3 of your cycle, and we'll do a test. The thing that, at least through my experience and my training, is that when we do a test like that and it's just one day out of your cycle, it's kind of just like peeking through a window of a house that you want to go by and not going and taking a tour of the entire house, right? So you get a snippet of information. If things are out of whack, then you can see drastic like changes, but we're not getting like, okay, well, this is just day 3 of your cycle. What's happening on day 14 and what's happening on day 20, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a difference between just a blood test. If you keep going back for more blood draws, then yes, you get more information. For blood work that I do, because we also did blood work outside of just the hormone testing, I think that's kind of what you're referring to. I look at it through a functional lens. So it's looking at a different set of lab ranges. Typically, it's a smaller normal is considered, or optimal, I should say, is considered optimal in a smaller range. So you can be an outlier more frequently in that versus when something is in quote unquote lab range or conventional medicine lab range, it's a bigger range.
Wow,
So you can
interesting.
fall in within that range and it's like, oh, you're normal versus, well, I still have symptoms and I'm feeling this way, right? So just the way that I'm looking at it is a little bit different. So I do look to see, is it on the lower side? Is it on the higher side? But when I'm looking at entire blood work, like you said, I am looking for patterns. I'm not just looking, oh, cholesterol's elevated. And then it's like, okay, well, let's look at your liver too. And let's look at your iron levels and your thyroid, because when cholesterol's elevated, the liver can be a little funky, the thyroid can be funky, which is like, just fluctuating other markers.
And
So
this is like
that's, yeah,
why it's so important to work with somebody who is able to look at the whole person. I mean, this is the number one. I know I talk on here a lot about
no, it's great. Yeah.
doctors, and I'm not talking down about doctors, because they're like my gynecologist, love her for at least mentioning I could look into alternatives. And I realize that doctors just aren't trained in this stuff, but it's like, this is the frustration, that it's important you understand that when you go to a traditional medical doctor, the way they've been trained is there's a certain range. And even though you're having all these symptoms, everything's coming back normal. And so many women are being told that their symptoms are normal. And just because they're common doesn't mean that they're normal. And maybe it has something to do with the measuring system, right? And so working with someone like you, Lauren, or anybody in holistic health, they're going to
Yeah.
look at this whole story and how everything talks to each other.
Yeah. It's looking for a lot of patterns. And also what I love to do is, you had blood work done a year before, 2 years before. Send me that stuff too, because I like to see trends over time as well, right? Like, because blood work is also just a snippet. If you did a crazy workout the day before, your hydration can be wacky, your inflammation can be wacky. So Was that the same 2 years ago? Was that the same 1 year ago? Like when did symptoms start? So it is looking at the whole picture, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we can talk about that forever. But
Yeah.
I guess doing the hormone test, having a different set of eyes on it, and then kind of explaining to you what I saw, I think that was really nice and important for you to kind of understand, like, because your estrogen did come back a little bit elevated, but we were also looking at the metabolism of estrogen, which is really important. And for anybody listening, when someone says, "Oh, your estrogen's elevated," if we're not pooping, if our liver's not working up to par, like those things affect the way we get rid of estrogen in the body, which can then lead to estrogen dominance and estrogen kind of just being a little bit more elevated than what we want, which then a lot of people will have, these crazy PMS symptoms and
And that's where my
things.
symptoms were happening.
Yeah.
That's what I was experiencing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Is-
So even though
Yeah.
your estrogen wasn't like, whoa, it's crazy high, it was, I wrote here like slightly high, right? So for me, that was still like, okay, we're still slightly high. We can get it better, right? Now let's look at some of the other things. You had some elevated cortisol, which when our cortisol is elevated, that means stress is kind of pretty high, even though, like you said, you were doing all these great practices and stuff. But I think I like to drive this home for a lot of clients is stress is not just psychological, it's not just emotional. Stress can also be chemical, stress can be physical, stress can be trauma from years and years ago. If we're over exercising and we're not having adequate rest, that can be stressful to the body. If we're not eating enough calories and not enough energy for the body, that could be stress, right? So there's so many types of stress. And it's crazy because it literally happened to me. I lost my period because I was over exercising, under eating, and literally stressing my body out, having too much caffeine during the day. And it creates this like bubble effect, a tipping point, and then it's like, boom, okay, period's
Yeah.
gone. Like your body doesn't have enough energy. It doesn't feel safe enough to bring a child into the world. So there's so many things, but
Yes.
stress doesn't have to be like, I'm going through a death in the family. I'm going through a divorce. I'm going through a stressful job. It can be
Yeah.
so many factors,
Yeah.
traveling time zones, sleep, having issues with sleep. That's all stress to the body.
Yeah, you make such an important point. I remember because you came and spoke to the women inside my Happy Body hypnosis program about this a while back. I think it was over a year ago when we first started working together.
Probably.
And you had talked about micro stressors, and you've
Mm,
shared this on your Instagram page before. Things that are micro stressors, like the
yeah.
ding of your cell phone, the ringing of
Notifications, constant.
notifications.
Yeah.
Yeah, constantly being pulled. It's so interesting when we start thinking about how stress can kind of show up, especially unconsciously, that we're all living in this elevated level of stress that we have to really take stock of where we're at in our lives. And for me, I had experienced a death in the family prior to this in 2020. Just in case anyone's listening has experienced anything major, like major grief or loss, I experienced a death in the family, and it was 6 months later, July 2020, when I experienced the first most excruciating period of my life. That, and I was also joint pain, and there's some other things that I was experiencing. It's not lost on me that I went through that emotional trauma, and then all of a sudden this pain and some of these other things set in. So, and then here you are looking at my hormones, seeing that cortisol, was it elevated or was it not being metabolized? What was the deal with my cortisol?
Um,
She's got my charts up, guys.
yeah. Yeah. So there's an analogy with a faucet and a drain. So your free cortisol is basically the water coming from the faucet, and then your cortisol metabolites are what's draining from, the sink. So basically there could be too much water in the sink, or the sink is clogged. So for you, the sink was clogged and you weren't clearing cortisol. So it might not necessarily be like, oh, you have a crazy amount of cortisol, but your body wasn't able to like metabolize and really like break it
Yeah.
down and get rid of it and that
And
sort of
now the
thing.
metabolization, is that where optimizing drainage and detoxification pathways comes in?
Yeah.
Which,
And this goes for toxins and toxicity in the body also. There's two sides, right? can we decrease the amount of toxins, or can we decrease the cortisol spikes in the body? But then also, can we optimize how that stuff is broken down and metabolized and gotten, get cleared
Yeah.
from the body as well? So it's a little balancing act of both of those. You worked on all of those, amazing things to support your body while we're assisting with actually helping the
Yeah.
detoxification. And
Which makes so much sense when you think about it. It's like I was doing the hypnosis, I was meditating, I was going to yoga. So I was doing all the things in terms of trying to keep the cortisol levels down, but then I wasn't detoxifying them or processing them out in the right way or assisting my body to process them out,
yeah,
which
and
is what you and I kind of worked on.
yeah, exactly. And there's so many reasons why cortisol can be elevated, even blood sugar being crazy and having blood sugar spikes throughout the day, having like you said, alarm clock goes off, and like little micro stressors that can be cortisol spikes as well. And then we worked a lot on blood sugar and just
Yeah.
understanding, that just because you're not diabetic, that doesn't mean blood sugar doesn't play a role in your health, right? And
Mhm.
I think this is a big thing that I love to tell people, especially it's like, oh, well, I have diabetes in the family. It's like, okay, well, let's do everything we can so that that's not the path for you, right? So working on blood sugar control and regulation now so that later down the line, because diabetes is
Yeah.
something that doesn't happen overnight. It takes decades or
Yes.
years, insulin resistance in the body and then blood sugar dysregulation. So,
Yeah.
and I remember some of your insulin was a little elevated, your hemoglobin A1C was a little elevated. So those are kind of pointing to, okay, we're not, going trending towards diabetes right now, but they're going to be like higher. So it's something that we can work on and like try to bring back down, which is a thing in, and I'm kind of going through this with my dad right now. Like, he's just newly diagnosed diabetic, but
Same, my
it's
mother
like,
as well.
yeah, and it's like a pet peeve I have is like, and I don't want to like blame doctors, but like they don't have enough time, I don't think, to like really hone it in on people. And you see them once a year, and that's not enough. But he's been dealing with stuff for years, and like,
Yep.
let's catch it in your 40s and 50s. Why are we waiting until you're 70 and now diagnosed and now
And put
dealing
you on a
with foot
medication.
ulcers and like all of
Yeah.
this stuff, right? So it's change your diet, change your lifestyle, maybe medications earlier or supplements earlier that can support to prevent that stuff is really where I'm like, this needs to be the focus of healthcare.
Yeah, I
It's crazy
know.
that it's
It's
not.
so crazy.
We wait, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, let's monitor it.
And yeah. And that's what is funny about like, well, and this is also another thing that you and I focus on because my mom also just was diagnosed with diabetes. My grandfather had diabetes. So I knew that it was in the family. But not only that, I've always kind of noticed that I've been sensitive to sugar. Like I can feel it in my body. And so knowing that, and then you looking at my labs and being like, huh, like if I went to a normal doctor, they'd be like, you're good. I would have gotten the stamp of approval. But that
Yeah.
didn't fly by you. You were like, this is a little elevated considering that
Hmm.
you're super active and you're a pretty healthy eater. So something's going on here. So to be able
Yeah,
to kind of
exactly.
recognize that now at the age of, 37, 38, that's so valuable because now we've put some little tweaks in place.
Also, for you, we ran a comprehensive panel. So oftentimes when we go to a primary care doctor, they'll do a CBC, which is a complete blood count. They'll do a CMP. They'll do maybe vitamin D, a TSH, which is a thyroid hormone, stimulating hormone, and then that's kind of it. But when I work with people, I'll either give you like a list, like, hey, try to get these by your insurance, and if not, we can get them together. But you and I actually did blood work together, and we did, like 72 markers, or maybe more than that. But the one thing that I want to point out is we did insulin together. So a lot of times doctors don't run insulin. And so that number can be elevated even if some of the other markers are not showing. So your insulin came back a little elevated. So that was also like, hey, blood sugar, there's extra insulin in the blood. Why is that happening? Okay, let's address and try to improve. And
Yeah.
I do want to point out I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't diagnose anything. But when I look at the stuff, I'm looking for the trends like, oh, we're having some trends of blood sugar issues, but I'm not like, hey, you're diabetic or hey, you're this, right? So we're showing trends and patterns of some liver dysfunction or, it
Yeah.
basically comes down to where are there imbalances in the body? And then where can you and I start implementing some changes so that we start to balance the body out and it starts to
Yeah.
work a little bit better.
So before we get to what some of those lifestyle tweaks were, because I think that's going to be super helpful for everybody to hear some of the things I implemented. But before we get to that, what else? There were a couple other things you saw, right, in terms of my blood tests, like vitamin wise deficiencies, things like that.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, again, was all news to me. I was like, really? I'm deficient in protein? Like, what? Like,
So, and you know what? I think the majority of people think they're eating enough protein, but at the end of the day, we're all probably
yeah.
under eating unless you have a really good idea of what your protein intake is. Yeah, so I saw that like methylation, we did homocysteine, so your methylation, which is a liver, a, a, a part of detoxification in the liver, but that typically will, if that's elevated, a lot of times it's like a B vitamin. We don't have enough nutrients to do the processes the body needs to do. And similar to a lot of times I see people with low functioning thyroid, and it's, you look at, okay, well, are you having enough selenium? Are you having enough zinc and, iodine? Like all of these nutrients needed in the body, which can be a digestive issue. You might be eating them, but maybe you're not absorbing them, or it could be you're just not getting them in your diet because you're eating a lot of processed foods. And so there's a lot of avenues to go down.
I'm going to pause you for a second. You made a really good point. And I've had this conversation a lot with my mom where it's like you might be eating the nutrients, but if your gut health isn't well, like if your microbiome isn't well, then your gut isn't absorbing the nutrients. So
Yeah.
there's so many parts to this. Like
Or if
that's
there's
again, it's the holistic approach.
inflammation, yeah. Or like if there's just inflammation in the gut, or yeah, the bile's not secreted, or if you don't have enough hydrochloric acid or enzymes, like there's so many things. It's not
Yeah.
just I'll take a probiotic and it will fix everything. There's
Yeah.
a lot of, and that probiotics are great and they can be useful, but there's so many pieces to the puzzle. But in your case, you did have quite a few markers that was pointing to nutrient deficiencies, like even your hemoglobin was on the lower side and your MCV. So that was pointing to B vitamins, B12, folates, and vitamin C. Um,
Well, at that time too, I wasn't eating a whole lot of meat.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, that could play a role as
And
well.
I know that that can play a role in B vitamin, which,
Or
I think
iron as
anybody who is
well.
vegetarian or vegan, like, I've gone through that. And if that's where you're at, just make sure you're supplementing with B vitamins because I didn't supplement while I was eating vegan, and that was not smart.
And I think also in your case, you were bleeding heavily during your period.
True.
So
Yeah.
especially from an iron standpoint, your blood is coming out faster than a
True.
typical cycle. So you're depleted more. So you need to replete and really give your body the nutrients it needs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And now I'm all about those smidge beef liver supplements.
yes.
I'll include a link to those below.
Yeah. No, I mean,
I live
and
that smidge beef liver life.
I know we
It's
kind of talked about it too, about the vitamin A overload, which comes up in talking with practitioners a lot. Synthetic vitamin A versus whole food vitamin A versus,
so
just
you can do it
getting things from a
safely.
whole
Yeah.
food source rather than synthetic sources too.
Right. And so let me ask you a question. With the beef liver supplement, would you
Well,
consider that a
so
whole food option?
yeah, I mean, so it's taken from beef liver, right? So it's not like it's made in the lab, like, oh, what are the
Got
components
it.
that we need to put together in order to make a chemical type,
Got it. So it's
what
when
the
you say
scientists are
real
really
whole
good at
food.
doing.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not chemical. So even though it's a supplement, it's still considered it's from a whole food source,
It's
which is what
sourced,
makes
right?
it.
Where is
Yeah.
it sourced from? Yeah.
Yeah.
And similar to ascorbic acid versus a whole food vitamin C source, those can be completely different on the body as well.
Cool.
Sourcing is huge when it comes to picking and choosing what supplements would be best for you.
Which is why I get all of mine through your full script.
Yeah.
Because it's overwhelming. It's
It
overwhelming to
does.
understand. I mean, that's the other thing. That's another reason why it's so important to invest in working with someone on this, because you want to know first, what are you actually deficient in, instead of just taking a bunch of vitamins and throwing them against the wall and seeing what sticks, because that's not good for you. It's not good for your body because you don't really know what you need. It's also a waste of money. So why not take that and invest in actually working with someone like Lauren or a holistic practitioner to not only look at your blood test, look at what you're deficient in, and then make sure that when you're making these choices around supplements, that you're actually choosing brands and source supplements that can actually help, as opposed to walking into a CVS and being like, oh, this bottle looks good because the marketing on it says it makes my skin look amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So, I have to laugh. Before you and I started working together, my husband kind of made a comment. He was like, I have a coach that used to say supplements are just expensive pee. And I was like, yeah, whatever. This is before I started. 3 months later, when I was not having cramps and I wasn't PMSing, I was feeling amazing. My husband was like, man, Lauren's worth her weight in gold, huh? And
Did
I
you
was like,
start
yes, she is.
the supplements are working a little
He
bit?
was like, all right, I'm sold.
Yeah, but you've
And now
also
he's always like, what does Lauren say about that? What does Lauren say about that?
you changed so many things, though, like supplements are fantastic, but I always say this, like you can't out supplement a crappy lifestyle. You can't out
Yeah.
supplement a crappy diet. Like
Yeah.
those are a foundation. So we worked on a lot of the foundational stuff also. But you also came to
Yeah.
me with so much awareness for your body, which when we're lacking that, that's kind of like the first place I start with people. It's like, well, let's pay attention to things we do every day, right? So you
Yeah.
had so much of that already. And you also had so many great lifestyles. It was just literally tweaking. Like, okay,
Yeah.
let's the coffee thing, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
not have coffee on an empty stomach because that will spike your
So
cortisol and
this
your
was like,
blood sugar.
yeah. So let's pause for a second. We're going to go over the lifestyle shifts that I made
Yeah.
because I think these are helpful and they're little tweaks, you guys. The first one that I made that was kind of a it's not a big change, but like it took me a month or two to really, like, I would fall off and then I'd get back on, and now it's like consistent. So the first thing I did was I actually loved nitro cold brew. And turns out having nitro cold brew on an empty stomach is not good for your cortisol. So, first of all, I swapped out nitro cold brew and I started just doing regular coffee. Now that I'm pregnant, I actually do just half calf. So I've learned it's really just the ritual and maybe a tiny bit of caffeine. And that's like a
Hmm.
personal decision. I mean, some people would decide not to have any caffeine when they're pregnant.
Yeah.
I've decided a tiny bit of caffeine is okay for me once a day, but I swapped out the nitro brew to just regular coffee. It's a little bit less caffeinated, and made the tiny tweak that I first would have my breakfast or eat something and then have coffee.
Yeah.
That's it. A very simple thing, because when you have coffee on an empty stomach, it spikes your cortisol.
Hmm. And when your cortisol spikes, it's a signal to your brain, hey, whoa, let's pay attention. What's going on here? Like, are we have to run from a lion? Do we have to do something really important? And, when that happens, then you'll have a spike of blood sugar as well, because that's just the way that your body prepares for survival. It's sending blood sugar to the muscles so that they can run, sending blood sugar to the brain so that you can think and be hyper vigilant and all of that. So the cortisol and the blood sugar get spiked. And then sometimes people get a little jittery, or sometimes they have some side effects also. So it's person to person for sure. But yeah,
It's such a
switching
small
and just
tweak.
having the food
Yeah.
first.
And
And
you know
then,
what? It's like I have my smoothie and I'll drink half of the smoothie, but at least I have something in my stomach, and then I'll kind of start on my coffee. I
yeah.
mean, I literally have to wait 5 more minutes before I start my coffee. It does contribute, though. I do laugh. You've seen the TikTok memes of the woman with her 5 drinks. Have
Yes.
you seen this? That
The
is definitely
water, the
me.
this, the
Like
that.
if my
Yeah.
husband wants to go for a walk in the morning, Sometimes we'll drive down to the beach and I'm like, so let me get my drinks. And I've got my electrolytes, I've got my smoothie, and I've got my coffee with my MCT oil, and I'm carrying all of them. And how many times have they ended up all over my shirt, which is like,
Yeah.
or all
Someone's got
over
to
the
invent
car.
like a cup that
Yeah. It
has like a
has all
three
three.
in one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that actually reminds me of another tweak I made. I start my day with 24 ounces of water with electrolytes added to it. I have a 24-ounce water bottle, and that's 1/3 of the water I need for the day. And then I just have to get through 2 more of those bottles. And I've had about 75 ounces, which is about 2 times my weight. Or what is it?
Yeah.
It's like half
Yep. Half your body weight in
half your
acid.
body weight,
But
not 2
that's a
times.
minimum. That's a recommended
Yeah.
minimum. Now that you're pregnant, now that you're working out, if we're doing hot yoga, if we're doing a crazy CrossFit workout, if you live in Arizona and it's 100 degrees out every day, like you got to modify and add according to what's going on in your life. But
Yeah.
that's like a minimum, like minimum 75 ounces. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's a
But
must every day.
it's a must. And I was not doing that before. Like I have no idea how much water I was drinking, to be
And
honest.
you'd be
And
surprised how many clients come to me with like, yeah, I drink water. And then I'm like, okay, well, how many ounces? Let's start there. And then it's like, oh, 50. It's like, okay, like
yeah,
we gotta up that. We gotta, because you
yeah,
you forget that our cells are made out of so much water, and when they're our cells are dehydrated, right? Like they can't function properly. They can't do the things that they're supposed to do. We're running it, think of water as a nutrient. We're running on low nutrient, and that goes for nutrient deficiencies as well. And then, it just it's a whole snowball effect. It affects the entire working of the body. And then electrolytes, right? You're drinking the water, but then now you're adding the magnesium, potassium, sodium, and it's allowing water to penetrate the cells and get hydrated from a cellular level a little bit deeper while repleting a lot of those minerals that we use for so many things.
yeah. So there's 2 things happening there. It's structuring the water, right? Because when there's no
Hmm.
structure to the water, your body doesn't actually absorb. When you're just drinking water by itself, sometimes there's not enough minerals in it because of the purification process, right? If you have
It
filtered
depends on what water
water,
you're drinking.
yeah,
Yeah. Reverse osmosis kind of takes all
yeah.
of the nutrients and minerals out. Yeah.
And so your body's not actually absorbing it. So even though you're drinking water, you're not really getting hydrated. So even just the simple act of squeezing lemon or like a little bit of Himalayan sea salt will structure the water to help your body absorb it. Can you share what are some of the symptoms that can happen from not getting enough electrolytes?
So every electrolyte's different. It could be very simple from like brain fog to getting headaches and migraines to feeling lightheaded to like a lot of fatigue to having muscle cramps in your body to the extreme of, I work in the hospital as well. People will come in, and one of the top reasons why old people come in is from dehydration, but then also electrolytes are all over the place. They're wacky. And so they can get confused. It's kind of like a UTI in the elderly population. A UTI can send them hallucinations and, crazy a little bit. So some of
Yeah.
those electrolyte imbalances also affect the elderly quite severely, like heart palpitations. It's like there could be a list, like a slew of
I'm glad you're saying this because I've been
symptoms.
trying to get my mom on electrolytes for a really long
Yeah.
time.
And we know they're not drinking enough
She's going to
water.
be
They're
listening to
probably
this.
drinking a
Mom,
pot of coffee
yeah.
a day. I don't want to bash coffee because I do believe there's a time and a place for it. And I drink coffee. It comes down to that moderation piece, but also
Yeah.
like if you are drinking a ton of coffee, just balance it out with a lot of water as well because
Yeah, it's
it's a
dehydrating
diuretic.
you.
So yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I digress about brands here for a second, but I have a question for those people who don't like the taste of electrolytes. I've seen that Trace Minerals has a liquid one now. Does that have a taste to it or is it tasteless?
I'll be honest, it does have like a teeny little taste, but I do think I've over squirted, and that's where the taste comes from. But if you do just a few drops, you're not going to
Yeah.
taste anything. But
Are
if you
you
do like,
getting the same amount of electrolytes that you would get from one of their packets?
so
If you
they're all like same with Redmond, same with LMNT, same with pickleball. I'm a huge fan of now. You got to look what's the amount of potassium, what's the amount of sodium, what's the amount of magnesium, and just kind of base it off of what
how you
what
feel.
you're needing, or mix and match, rotate them.
Yeah.
Because I personally have an AquaTrue, which is a filter. and it does reverse osmosis, I have to add back minerals because it takes out everything. So I just use the trace minerals as like a little drop, 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 just to like you said,
Yeah.
structure it and add
Yeah.
it back in.
So, okay. So one of the other lifestyle tweaks that I made with protein, we need, is it 80 grams of protein? It's more when you're pregnant. I feel like it's like 100 grams of protein a day that you
There's
need
a
when you're pregnant.
specific
But what's,
equation, but most women, it's kind of around that 90 to 100, 80 to
it's way more than
100
you think it is,
grams.
basically.
Yeah, and when you're pregnant, when you're lactating, when you're
Yeah.
in a healing process, right? We forget that if you're going through a protocol of healing, like your body's going
Needs
through, or if you're
protein.
stressed, going through a lot, so it's going to need
Yeah.
more.
So what I've been doing is first thing in the morning, I have my protein smoothie. I use Be Well by Kelly, which is a clean grass-fed beef-based protein powder that I have come to love. And
Yeah, it's
I
great.
add collagen powder to it, which is another 14 grams of protein. And then I add peanut butter or almond butter. Sometimes I'll add flaxseed. And when it's all said and
Chia,
done, yeah,
yeah,
chia, when it's all said and done, that smoothie, and it tastes great. It's like chocolate. It tastes great. And it's 50 grams or 52 grams of protein in just my breakfast.
yeah.
And the one thing I found in terms of a lifestyle shift is like when I run out of protein powder, because I don't always keep it on auto ship, it's really hard even to have to think about a meal. This is something too that I teach a lot of my clients. Set up your life so that it's easy for you to be
Successful.
successful. And if
Yeah,
there's 21 meals in a week and you can eliminate 7 of those meals by putting them on autopilot, I'm just going to do a protein powder that I know I'm getting 50 grams of protein. I'm just going to do that smoothie every single day. That's 7 meals you don't have to think about that you already are eating healthy.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So
And
it
I
eliminates a lot of the stress and also just knowing you're getting the protein you need. And then throughout the rest of the day, I'll get protein in other ways. Like I'm
totally.
already halfway there, more than halfway there.
Well, I was gonna say, like a lot of times I'll say, just get at least 30 grams of protein for breakfast, and then you know you're a third of the way there, or like you said, half of the way. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of a goal that I definitely recommend with clients. I'm not a big fan on calorie counting. I'm more of a whole food, get as much whole foods as diverse and variety as possible, and then have that protein goal because protein satiates us. So a lot of times our empty calories and binge eating, it comes when we're not satiated. So if you're eating enough protein throughout the day, then we tend to not pick at the chips and the cookies and the cereal and stuff like that as much because our body's like, oh, I'm not that hungry. Like I've been fed. I feel
Right.
well nourished.
Right.
Um, but
Yeah.
also I don't love calorie counting. Just, I work with a lot of women and I personally had some disordered eating and I just find that it becomes another stressor that
Yeah.
I don't love. So an easy, do I get enough protein today? And then just fill the gaps in with, whole
Exactly.
foods the rest of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. It lifts a layer of that, like needing to be obsessed with it or tracking it. It's allowing you to kind of just know that you're getting those nutrients and then relax, you know.
And you and
So
I've talked also about balance, like helping
yeah.
blood sugar is, having a balanced meal versus empty carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So not just a bowl of pasta, but have a pasta with a sausage or ground beef or, adding some vegetables in as well. So
Yeah.
adding fat, protein, dressing your carbs, glucose goddess shout out. Like
Yeah.
she's been, super knowledgeable and like just easy tips, right? So I love referencing her to clients, just extra blood sugar education.
Absolutely. So we talked about coffee after breakfast. We talked about electrolytes. We talked about increasing protein at breakfast. The other major thing that we really looked at was my gut health, and we went through a pretty intense gut health protocol.
Yeah. So I work a lot with this company called Cellcore. I use other supplements as well, but I've been leaning on them a little bit because I really love their step one or jumpstart kit, which is kind of a drainage detox support kit. And you started with that for 30 days. It really targets liver support, kidney support, gut support. And anytime we have estrogen dominance or a lot of estrogen, or anytime I look at blood work and the liver pops up a lot in patterns, or even blood sugar or gut health type stuff. We're always looking to what's going on in the colon, what's going on in the liver and bile ducts. And there's this beautiful drainage funnel that we have, and at the bottom is the colon. So when the colon is not working properly, and it's funny, I remember when I first started this journey, I talked to a lot of people about constipation because that's what I was dealing with. And you'd be surprised how many women are struggling with constipation. And constipation just means you're not having a bowel movement every day. And I do not agree that having every other day or every 3 days is normal. Like, oh, that's your normal. Like, I just don't necessarily agree with that. You should be having a bowel movement every day, even once or twice, maybe three
Just
times
FYI,
if it's
since doing this with you, I definitely do every single
yeah,
day. No.
like a formed stool, not
It's
like
weird to me if I don't.
exactly. And once you start having one every day, you're like, oh my God, this is what life could be like. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, really focusing on the colon, because when that's backed up, estrogen recirculates, toxins recirculate, the microbiome gets pissed off and not happy. There's fermentation that can happen and bloating that can happen. And the gut microbes, there could be an overgrowth of the bad guys and an undergrowth of the good guys. Yeast can start to proliferate, parasites can get happy there. Like, there's so many things that could happen when the colon is blocked. And then the step up would be liver bile ducts. That's the next part of the drainage funnel. And it's very similar. Like, once we kind of make sure the colon's moving and you're having daily bowel movements, like, okay, let's start addressing the liver and bile ducts a little bit, which is also huge for estrogen metabolism, huge for just getting toxins out of the body.
Yeah.
So we worked a lot on the step one. We did the drainage, and we kind of did we
We
do
did
all
we did
four?
3 steps.
Three
We did
steps. I think we
three.
did 3 steps. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So 3 months worth.
I
Like the second
do.
step, we kind of worked in there was like a parasite cleanse.
Yeah, yeah. And the more I do this with people, the more I becomes clear to me how intertwined the uterus is with detoxification, and
Yeah.
how if we look at our cycle every month as a way to kind of get rid of stuff and shed the
Yeah.
lining and shed, if people are having too much blood or heavy periods, or there's so many factors, but improving this drainage and detoxification in your body will help that
Yeah.
process as well.
I actually had a gynecological appointment with a new gynecologist who, needless to say, I
Yeah.
saw her once and I never went back because I told her about the cyst and she was like, oh, well, that's going to make it harder to get pregnant. And that's going to make it harder if you do get pregnant and all this stuff that, by the way, that's, I got pregnant in 3 months and the cyst has disappeared since I got pregnant. So thank you very much. I don't subscribe to that. You know what? No, thank you. Just was really kind of dismissive of what I was doing alternatively. And she saw the inflammation because I had all the symptoms of endometriosis. So one of the symptoms I experienced was bleeding between periods. This had been happening for years. And I had moved, so I miss my old gynecologist. The only reason I wasn't with my old gynecologist, she knew this about me, so it was not really much of an issue. But this new person that I was seeing saw that I was bleeding between periods, and she's like, "Oh, there's so much inflammation and da da da." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, this is kind of just a symptom of the endo I've been dealing with for years." And she was like, "Well, I think we should put you on an antibiotic." And I was like, hold on, what is the antibiotic for? And she was like, well, I guess we could wait until your pap smear comes back and then decide. And I was like, huh, that sounds like a novel idea.
I remember you texted me
Yeah.
that too.
I was so pissed that she wanted to put me on an antibiotic. So I waited for the pap smear to come back just for her to say, oh, yeah, everything's normal. Maybe we don't need that antibiotic. And by the way, this woman in her bio and website, she puts endometriosis as one of her areas of specialty. And it just makes me so sad for all the women out there who are just like, let's just throw this antibiotic at the wall, which, by the way, is going to make things worse because it's going to impact your microbiome, which impacts your ability to drain anything. Oh, and she also told me that with the pain, I should just start Advil before the pain starts. And I was like, okay, so right now I'm taking 17 Advil in a span of 3 days. You want me now to take more? And she goes, oh, 17. No, 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 you shouldn't take more. And I was like, okay, so then how do you want me to do this? Because you just told me I should start Advil before I'm actually in pain, but you're telling me I'm also taking too much. That was how she wanted me to solve the problem. It was so frustrating and really just, it's sad. It just made me really sad that there's a lot of women that think that that's the only answer. I was like all fired up after that.
We've talked about this too, like just, getting put on antibiotics with, and I think I asked you, I'm like, oh, the culture come back? Like, is there a bacterial infection? Right? Like,
Yeah.
is that why she was recommending that? Because that's where my brain goes, right? Okay,
Yeah.
bacterial infection, let's go on
Yeah.
antibiotics. That makes sense. But like, yeah, before the culture, like I said, I'm not a doctor. Like,
Yeah.
but I have some critical thinking skills, and yeah, you nailed it with some of the things that could happen with, and a lot of clients come to me with, oh, lots of antibiotic use, and you're
Yeah.
wiping out a lot of that good gut
Yeah.
microbiome. But also there's a time and place for them, right? I love modern medicine and all that,
Yeah.
but it's given out like candy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
Their
I think
training
what
is
you
really
said,
just in like, oh, let me check off a list of symptoms and then this must mean I should prescribe this. And that's it. That's the extent of their training. No, no lifestyle medicine, no nutrition.
yeah, and I realize also they're there to fix problems right then and there, right? I need
Yeah.
to address the stuff going on for you right this moment. And sometimes that can be a really important thing, but then also
In
could
an
be the band-aid
emergency.
solution.
Yeah.
Right, right. In an like, yeah, blood pressure's through the roof. Like, we got to give you a medication right now to bring it back
Yeah.
down. But then also let's talk about ways that why your blood pressure gets that high and start implementing some changes so that you might not have
Yeah.
to be on that forever.
Yeah. And also to the piece, what I didn't even get a chance to sort of come around to was in that third month of the cell core protocol, there was inflammation, and part of the detoxification process sometimes can
Mm,
inflame. Like when your body's letting go of stuff, it's part of trusting the process. Like it's not a quick fix or a magic pill, although it was pretty damn awesome. And I will say, looking back, it was pretty fast. But while you're going through it, that third month, it was like, okay, I feel a little inflamed. Instead of being like, this isn't working, I just trusted the process. And then we
yeah,
decided after
huge.
month 3 that I was like, let's give it a little break and let things kind of see where we're at. And that's what we did. And then that was all I did in terms of gut health program. And then I also was taking a prenatal vitamin.
Hmm.
I actually, it's funny because when you and I decided on a prenatal, I wasn't trying to get pregnant at the time, but you put it in my head. You were like, listen, we got to put you on a multivitamin, and we might as well just do prenatal because we can support the ovaries and all this as well. And then when you do decide to get pregnant, or if you do decide to get pregnant, your body's kind of already there, because with prenatal vitamins, it takes 3 months of being on those vitamins for your body to actually have those nutrients, right? So like whatever
Yeah,
you're
like I
eating
don't know the
now.
exact number, but they'll recommend like, 6 months prior to trying to conceive,
Yeah.
like just try to, you know,
Yeah.
hop
So I
on.
kind of went on those prenatals, just not even thinking about getting pregnant. And
Well, I
then,
think they had a lot of good B vitamins, which you needed. And it
yeah,
just like, I like to look at things like what's the least amount of supplements I can give or recommend somebody, right? Without like,
yeah,
oh, you got to take this one and this one and this one. It's, oh, let's take this all encompassing. Same with the beef liver. Like, this is giving you so many great nutrients, like, boom.
yeah. I'll tell
Yeah.
you what, I'm planning on staying in this prenatal for like the rest of my life. Because also my eyelashes have grown as long as I used to do Latisse years ago, back in my Miss America days. Latisse makes your eyelashes grow long. And I kid you not, my eyelashes are as long as they were when I used to do Latisse. And that's just from taking a prenatal vitamin.
But
So
also think of the gut healthy work you
yeah,
did, of like now you're absorbing more of the nutrients you eat. Like, yes, prenatal, but also, it's a little bit of everything.
yeah, totally. Absolutely.
And if your
Yeah.
body's not as stressed, then now it can give the nutrients to hair and nails and eyelashes because it's not needed for survival,
Right. It's so
right?
crazy.
There's a lot of
And
components.
talk about fertility and getting pregnant. I'm 38 years old. So I was prepared for this could take a little while. And when it happened on the third month of trying to conceive, I literally was like, oh shit. I thought I had more time.
I'm not ready.
Ah.
Yeah.
And do attribute that to the work that you and I did together. I just feel like we got my body in optimal shape, everything working harmoniously. And, and then there's some other things like there's a lot of stuff with hypnosis and mindset work that I need to
1000%.
deep dive. I was reading a book, actually. I'm going to digress here for a second. I was reading a book called Spirit Babies when I got pregnant.
Think I listened to a podcast on that book.
Yeah. And it was written by a medium who basically
Yes.
talks about this idea that there's little spirit babies who are waiting to come into the world. And for me, it was it was a spiritual decision because for a long time I didn't know if really was cut out to like have kids. And when I read that book, it gave me a lot of peace. Some people, maybe it's your destiny to have a child and there's a spirit baby and it's following you around. And other people, maybe your destiny is to make the choice.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that really kind of hit me. And it's just funny because I was reading that book when we got pregnant and I was like, it's that damn spirit baby's book thing.
Well, I mean, also I'm postpartum 5 months now, but I remember when we were trying, and it took us 6 months. So like in the grand scheme of things, like that's kind of average. But when you're going through it and you want to be pregnant yesterday, like
Yeah.
as a practitioner, I was like, okay, my, progesterone's low and my thyroid is this, and I was being so analytical about things
Yes.
that I'm like, I'm stressing my body out so much more than it needs to. Like, I'm preventing this from happening. So I actually started listening to, yeah, some more like, and you and I were doing, well, we mentioned this, you and I were doing hypnosis together and like the spiritual aspect of it, and even just the letting go, the surrendering, the, taking your conscious or like the critical mind out of a lot of it and like letting your body just be, right? So like that
Yeah.
was a huge component for me. And like knowing in my heart that it was going to happen and like I'm a healthy woman, I'm doing all of these things to positively support a pregnancy and everything, but also realizing that like full circle, mind body is so intertwined that yeah, it was
Yes.
just also very spiritual for me or emotional, like everything. And I refer a lot of people even to you or to other practitioners because it's not my expertise, but I know how important it is. And a lot of women, especially if there's any suppressed trauma, we're known to be people pleasers, we're known to be putting ourselves last. That comes out through symptoms
Yeah.
oftentimes in the physical form. So I can do so much with you, but then there's so much back work and work to be done through different realms of healing and different, modalities and
Yeah.
things like that, working on the spiritual and the emotional and the mind and all that.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you say this. I forgot about this until you just said that. It's something that I kind of started looking into as well when I was working with you at that time. I went to a shaman in the desert. And also within the same week, a shaman and then an energy worker here local to Hermosa. She's amazing. She read my cards one day.
I was going to say,
And
I have in your notes tarot cards.
yes, two practitioners kind of called me out. This is when I was starting to think about getting pregnant, but we hadn't really started trying yet. And I was dealing with the endometriosis and all these symptoms. And not really talking about it out loud. And I just literally had my cards read at this event in Hermosa. And she said, shout out, her Instagram handle is Flip Your Energy. So go check her out. She goes, okay, so what's going on in your, I guess it was like root chakra, sacral chakra area? I'm getting that there's there's trauma or something you're holding on to or sadness. And I was like, well, I'm definitely dealing with something in that area because I've had horrible, horrible period cramps. I've been, trying to work with them. And she goes, okay, let me ask when this started. And she does this pendulum and she's like, I'm getting 34, 35. And literally, what I said earlier, the very first period that was so intensely and painful for me was on my 35th birthday. So
Oh,
she dialed it into the date. And I know I kind of put together, I think there was some trauma for me, some fear around getting pregnant. And it came up when I first got pregnant, the experience we had losing my nephew at 2.5, very suddenly. He just didn't wake up from a nap. And it turns out he had a heart condition. So, it was very like the chances of
But
that happening
still,
very small,
yeah.
not to kind of put anything in anyone's heads. You don't have to worry about, but it brought like there's a lot of fear of losing a child, right?
Absolutely.
So that I think there was like sadness and that I was carrying in my body. And I think that was somehow related. And then
Yeah.
also this shaman, a week after that card reading, I go to the shaman. She's like, what's going on around here in the sacral chakra? And I was like, well, you and this other energy worker.
I think liver came up for you too. I remember you talking about the liver as well.
Something like that. Yeah. So was really interesting. And I'm a huge fan of somatic work. There's different ways you can do somatic movement. And I've always felt like through yoga and dance that I've gotten that. But I kind of started, I was like, I got to move my body. I have to move the pelvic floor. I've got to move this energy. Like I've got to do more movement like that to help whatever's stuck there needs to like be released. So that was another thing I kind of focused on
Mhm.
around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With my background of PT as well, I used to do a lot of fascial work. And even just like when fascia is tight, and fascia is just deep connective tissue, it's in every part of our body. But when that gets really tight and woven together, then blood flow is impaired. So even like that movement from an emotional and energetic standpoint, but also from a physical standpoint of just bringing blood flow to the area and
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
getting nutrients there. In modern medicine, we don't really talk about the energetic side of things, even though we're using MRIs and X-rays
Yeah.
and ultrasounds or even sound, right? We're using all of these modalities using energy, but then we don't talk about it from I don't know if it's quantum physics or like, like from
Yeah.
a emotions, like where do our emotions go?
Yeah. And how
Like
does that play into your health?
they're
Yeah.
stored somewhere in your body, right? And
Yep.
yeah, and I think we're just kind of touching the surface on that. But I do think the future is going to have so much more of that intertwined into, and that's part of the holistic space, working on that sort of stuff while you're working on a lot of the physical
Yeah.
and, lab numbers and this and that, but like also, diving
Yeah.
into other realms of it.
And there's also one more thing that I want to throw out there for this conversation. If you're listening because you have hormonal imbalances or endometriosis, or if you're trying to get pregnant right now, it's so important that you pick providers that are in alignment with you because the biology of belief. I think being a hypnotherapist and understanding how suggestibility works, especially when you're trying to get pregnant, you're really impressionable. And for me, I set really good mental boundaries, like with that one doctor when she was like, this could happen and this bad thing could happen. And I was like, no, cancel, bubble around me. That's not for me. I don't choose to like receive that as true for me because if I did, what would that do for my actual symptoms? You know what I'm saying? The biology of belief is really real. I mean, the placebo effect is 30% effective, which is the exact same amount of effective as a lot of painkillers are.
I was just
So,
say a lot of like the chronic pain research is now pointing to
yes,
mindfulness and
yes,
all that stuff.
because yes. So, the reason I share this is because I don't know if you experience this, Lauren, but I have friends who've gone through getting pregnant. And I feel very lucky. I found a provider very early on who is amazing and never even once brought this up. And I do understand some people want all the information. They want to understand the numbers. But for me, I'm 38 years old. I'm pregnant with my first child. I already am well aware of all the possible
Yeah.
things that could potentially go wrong. I don't need to live in that. I need to hear positive stories. I want to hear the good stories. I want to feed that into my brain. And so many women experience so much anxiety when they get pregnant. And it's because we're getting bombarded with negative information. So, what you need from your provider is someone who is going to help encourage you. And I know of a friend who went to the doctor first visit after getting pregnant And this person sat her down and was like, well, I have to sit you down and go through your possibility of having a miscarriage. Here's what it feels like, looks like. And if it happens, we can't do anything about it. So don't call, like, don't come here. Like, it was awful. She said she left that
Tears.
in
Like,
tears,
yeah.
terrified,
Yeah. I would
absolutely
too.
terrified.
Absolutely.
And
Oh my God, that's terrible.
yeah, and it happens a lot.
I know, I
Like,
know.
it
Well, I
happens
think
a
I told
lot.
you my story. I was trying to go through insurance and like get as much covered as possible. And I was looking for a midwife, and then we went to one highly regarded institution. And from the moment I walked in the door, my energy just shifted, and
I think I know what institution you're talking about.
I felt anxious, and I felt like I was a number, and it was like boom, boom, boom. Hey, you're in here. You're in here. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go. Take your blood pressure. Take that. Oh, it's like it was just like, holy, if this is what a first appointment is like, what is the day of giving birth going to be like? Because
Yes.
I want to be zen's the F out and like
Yeah.
in my zone, in my body. And I was going back and forth with the practitioner to a point where I did all this research. I like thought I was well knowledge in all this, and I was asking questions. And she was shooting stuff back at me, kind of like she knew better than I did. And
Yeah.
like, I'm the doctor, you're the patient, like blah, blah, blah. And I felt just gross leaving there. And I was like,
Yeah.
nope. So then I went to my original gyno, who was fantastic, and who even at 38 weeks, or I think it was like 37 weeks, I was like, hey, just I know we're getting close. What do you talk about induction and like all of that stuff? She's like, I honestly don't want to talk about it with you because let's just leave it off the table. I'll
Yeah.
talk to you about it when the time comes. And
Wow.
that was so powerful for me
Oh,
because once you start thinking of a ticking time bomb, these dates are rolling down, I'm getting closer, that shoots your sympathetic nervous system up. And that
yes.
like, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on choose a good practitioner.
And
I
there
know
are really good
somebody,
ones out there. If you get a bad feeling, leave
yeah,
and
just
go get
bounce.
another doctor. Just
I know
bounce.
someone that switched at like 25 weeks, and it was
Yeah.
just she wasn't vibing with them. They weren't
Yeah.
hearing her out. And that's obviously if shit hits the fan, you want somebody on your side and really knowledgeable and great, but also it's a two-way street
Yeah.
in all of that. Yeah.
And this is stuff that I didn't know probably a couple years ago, and even have learned so much more just from being pregnant and doing a lot of reading. That I think, had I gotten pregnant 5 years ago, I just would have gone with the first OB that I met, and I would have stayed with them and just gone along for the ride. And a lot of women do that because they don't know that they can have a say. And there are a lot of really amazing doctors out there, and but you do have to kind of shop around and be willing to ask questions. And if they don't receive them or they're not in alignment with you, there are some people who want to know the miscarriage numbers. That's what makes them feel in control, is to know all the
Yeah.
numbers, right?
Yeah.
That's not my way of doing it, so it's really
Hmm.
important to ask questions and be willing to walk
I
away. What?
remember when you asked me about my birth story, even there were like details that I didn't want to tell because I remember when I was pregnant, like you said, I wanted positive stories. And not that I had a negative by any means, but it was just like
Yeah.
tell the good stuff and like, leave the other stuff off the table, especially when you talk to a pregnant mother,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's just so much that can
Right.
influence
And
your subconscious. Like,
so much that it can influence. I know. And
yeah.
it's, you and I both have learned through mindset work and even hypnobirthing, like, I accept
Hmm.
whatever turn my birthing
Exactly.
takes. That is my end
Surrender.
all be all. I'm going to go in with a vision, and also I accept whatever turn my birthing takes. And you just surround yourself with the providers that you trust so that you
Hmm.
don't feel put like in a fight or flight response when things go a different way.
It's all about the empowering of it rather
Yeah.
than hey, I'm a person on the table, like you do with me what you think is right. It's like, no, you have like be a part of it, right?
Yeah.
There's so much more
Yes.
to
It's a
it. Yeah,
partnership. Okay.
absolutely.
So, well, I know we kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there, but it ties into this idea of finding the right provider. So,
Hmm.
we talked a lot today about drainage and detoxification pathways being a really important piece to balancing hormones, to processing out, if you're estrogen dominant or whatever it is that you might be dealing with. And so, Lauren has put together for us a free download
Yeah.
titled Optimizing Your Drainage and Detoxification Pathways. So if you want to
Yes.
learn more about that, I'm going to link to it below. Get her free download. Also, Lauren's on Instagram at holistic_PT, correct? Is that right?
Yeah.
I did that off
Holistic
of mem
spelt funky, like, yeah,
like
you should
whole, like
whole.
WHOLE. I'm going to link to it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I'm actually proud of myself because I remembered that like just out of
The
nowhere.
underscore,
I know your
yeah.
Instagram handle because I'm constantly DMing you questions.
Yes.
And also, Lauren works one-on-one with clients virtually all over the country. So I'm including her booking link below. Obviously, you already know that I've already stated she's worth her weight in gold. I know how scary it can be to invest in your health, especially when you're like, my insurance doesn't cover it, yada, yada. Number one, Lauren works with you when it comes to testing. She'll help you run tests through insurance if you can. But also, as we've talked about, there's a lot of holes in our healthcare system right now. And if you've been working on symptoms for a long time and nothing's getting better, you feel gaslit or not acknowledged for the things that you're feeling, I can't explain to you how relieving it is to work with someone like Lauren, who's going to look at the whole person comprehensively and help you create change at the root cause and actually heal your life and not just throw another prescription at you. So I highly recommend you click that link below.
I usually do like a 16-week package. I can do a one-off initial consult and give you a lot of information from there. But the 16-week, I find that it, like you said already, it takes time and our bodies are always working for us. It's just finding what we need to facilitate that healing. And sometimes things get a little rocky before we see the light. And sometimes we have to tweak things and move things around. So this is not by any means a quick fix, especially if you've been dealing with things for years. We can't expect things to happen overnight. Although 3 months, that's pretty
Yeah.
good. So after a 16-week program, then I can bump you into like a month to month and just, go from there. But I do have a portal which works like a AOL AIM instant messenger, like a throwback back in the day, where you can message me on that kind of 24/7. But I
Yeah.
typically will answer between Monday and Friday as best as I can.
The amount of
That's
support you offer your clients is amazing. I
yeah, I
mean,
try. I try to really
and I think that's the thing though, is like when you have the questions, how
yeah,
do I
yeah.
choose the right magnesium or, whatever. I mean, I know you also send recommendations for that stuff, but
But even protein
having
powder
access to
or
you,
food
yeah,
and yeah,
it's
or
cool.
it's customizable, it's curated for what your body is going through and your needs. And that's kind of like one of the big things that is different.
Beautiful. You rock. Thanks for being here, Lauren.
Learn how to calm an overactive brain and tap into your zone of genius. The Calm Edge One-on-One is a 3-month personalized hypno coaching experience that I designed to teach you how to rewire your thought patterns and reframe your emotional responses. Click the link below and schedule a complimentary 30-minute consultation call and let's chat.